women's suffrage movement in the United States was a decades-long struggle for women's right to vote. In 1848, Elizabeth Cady Stanton organized the first ever Women's Rights Convention. The convention, which was held in Seneca Falls, New York, marked the beginning of an organized national movement for women's suffrage in the United States. Despite agreeing on the final goal, there was a great deal of disagreement over strategy within the movement. Unfortunately, many early suffragists argued for the exclusion of women of color, in large part due to the ill-conceived belief that an inclusive movement would hurt its chances of success. Despite this, many women of color fought tirelessly in the movement for women's suffrage. Among them was Mary Church Terrell, a national activist for civil rights and women's suffrage, prominent abolitionist and women's rights advocate Sojourner Truth, the persevering civil rights advocate, journalist, and suffragist Ida B. Wells, and the indomitable Harriet Tubman, who fought for women's suffrage in her later years. These women, who would not see their own voting rights secured until the Voting Rights Act of 1965, were absolutely integral to the success of women's suffrage, and their contributions must not be forgotten. In 1878, the first suffrage amendment was introduced and later rejected in the United States Congress. In 1890, the National American Woman Suffrage Association was formed, marking a notable shift in strategy for the passage of a national constitutional amendment. In 1913, suffragists Alice Paul and Lucy Burns founded the Congressional Union for Women's Suffrage. Their first major public display for suffrage was a march in D.C. the day before Woodrow Wilson's inauguration. In 1918, after enduring great political pressure, President Wilson committed to supporting women's suffrage. In the ensuing year, the House of Representatives passed the 19th Amendment, leaving it to the U.S. Senate. 2 weeks later, the amendment passed in the Senate, beginning the ratification process throughout the nation. Within just 1 week, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan led the way as the first to ratify the 19th Amendment. The ratification process was completed 1 year later, on August 18, 1920, granting women the right to vote.